We've all experienced the emotions of anger and the desire to retaliate. However, is revenge ever justified? Welcome back to Culturally Booksmart. My name is Shauntea Lewis, and I'm happy that you were in tuned and ready for episode 18. In today's episode, we are going to dissect whether revenge is justified through the horror novel Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane. To determine this, we are going to break down today's episode into 3 acts. Act 1, we are going to dive into the psychology of revenge. Act 2, we're going to dissect the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade in the United States of America. Then in Act 3, we're going to determine whether a slave's decision to avenge their master is justified. Okay, let's get into today's discussion. So in Act 1, we are going to look at the psychology of revenge. So according to Psychology Today, revenge is personal, powerfully driven by emotion. The motivation for revenge might be initially fueled by anger, but it is ultimately powered by anticipated satisfaction or enjoyment. A powerful driving force for revenge is the belief that acting out the desire for revenge will provide an emotional release that it would help us feel better. However, studies have found that while there may be initial satisfaction, revenge actually perpetuates the pain of the original offense. Additionally, it often creates a cycle of retaliation, with the victim citing the most recent offense as yet another justification for further revenge. In effect, revengeful feelings and behaviors only train the brain to become more vulnerable to seek revenge. So seeking revenge is often an initial human response to wounds incurred at the hands of others. When focusing on revenge, we may be driven by a sense of rectifying whatever has caused pain. We could follow phrases such as an eye for an eye. We could cite the many historical examples of individuals acting out their revenge, even when it resulted in greater suffering for them in the long term. This is another aspect of attention to revenge. It can blind us to the long-term impact on ourselves. In effect, taking revenge may not ultimately be our best interest overall. So the problem is that revenge provides only a short-lived satisfaction. It does not really make up for the suffering we may experience, and in fact, it only prolongs the enduring suffering of the original offense. So we live in a culture in which many individuals are currently focused on anger and revenge, a culture that emphasizes action rather than reflection, being impulsive rather than thoughtful, and quick to globally blame others for all of their suffering. This is further endorsed by political movements that thrive on anger and revenge. In fact, vengeful tendencies have been linked with 2 social attitudes: right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance, and the motivational values that underlie these attitudes. As McKee states, individuals with such attitudes tend to be less forgiving, less benevolent, and less focused on universal connectedness type values. So letting go of the desire for revenge requires strengthening our rational brain to override our emotional brain, an ability to show restraint even while we may wish for revenge. It calls for strengthening our capacity for forgiveness of ourselves and others. This requires ongoing self-monitoring and commitment to change, and by doing so, developing a new default reaction to experiencing wounds. Additionally, channeling our attention towards the satisfaction of our personal core goals and aspirations frees us from bearing the weight of revenge. It helps us to move on in our lives in spite of our wounds. So even though the desire for revenge requires mental strength to override a negative emotional response, some may argue that being vengeful is a necessary means to an end. And by people, I mean the characters of the horror novel Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane. Situated in the time period of the transatlantic slave trade and inspired by true events, the African American characters Luke, Josephine, and Harriet did not have the mental strength to ward off their desire to avenge their slave owners. But is this understandable? So, Act 2, the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade. So, to understand the vengeful mindset of the characters Luke, Josephine, and Harriet, we need to understand the atrocities of the Atlantic slave trade. The violence of the transatlantic slave trade was not incidental, it was deliberate, and a highly structured tool used to break the human spirit and maintain absolute control. Because enslaved people they vastly outnumbered their captors on ships and plantations, enslavers relied on extreme public terror to prevent rebellion. This application of this violence can be categorized into 4 distinct areas. So one of this includes physical torture and punishment. So violence was used daily to enforce labor quotas and punish the slightest perceived disobedience. So some of this may look like the whip. So this was the primary tool of domination. Whippings often tore open the skin on a victim's back, leaving deep permanent scars that marked them for life. Mutilation as a warning. Runaway slaves or rebels routinely faced the amputation of ears, slits to the nose, or the severing of hamstrings and feet to permanently cripple them. And then we have the iron collars and mask. So enslaved people were forced to wear heavy iron neck collars with long protruding spikes that prevented them from lying down or running into the woods. Iron masks and muzzles were locked on their faces to prevent them from eating crops or speaking. And then we also have the psychological and the emotional violence. So this could be public humiliation, so punishments, brandings, and slave auctions were conducted publicly, and families were forced to watch the brutal beating of their loved ones, completely helpless to intervene. And then you have the forced separation, so the weaponized threat of selling away a child, spouse, or parent was used constantly to keep enslaved workers compliant. And then we also had forced breeding. So following the abolition of the international slave trade in 1807, enslavers pivoted to domestic breeding. So enslaved women were forced to breed with other enslaved men, and they were basically treated like livestock. And yeah, the extreme activities of the transatlantic slave trade, the list is vast. And it's extremely sad. And it's important that I listed some of the violence that was done in the transatlantic slave trade, because it is important that we understand why a slave would want to avenge their master, and understand the conditions that African Americans at the time, Africans had to endure as a result of being a victim of the transatlantic slave trade. So that is one of the many reasons why I decided to list the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade. But for some, this is common knowledge. For others, this is common knowledge too. Maybe I listed something that, maybe you don't really had an understanding of, but now you do. But the slave trade was extremely inhumane, and Africans were treated less worse than an animal, and they were treated in a way that was not human, and in a way that I believe that the African American community still deserve reparations for, because a lot of the physical and emotional abuse that was experienced by these Africans by the Africans has now continues to be, there's legacies that is now that you see evident within the African American community, and basically within Black people throughout the African diaspora around the world. And it's for this reason why I do believe that reparations is a necessity, and I would continue to be an advocate for African and for Black people worldwide to receive the reparations that they deserve. And listing all of these atrocities, and I know it's difficult to really put yourself in that shoes, or to even imagine yourself in a situation where you are a slave and you had to experience all these atrocities. But I want you to imagine yourself and ask yourself, like, is this something that if I experienced this, do you think that you would have that feeling of wanting to avenge the person who did all these atrocities to you? And while you're imagining that, we're now going to get into Act 3. So Act 3, is a slave's decision to avenge their master justified? So to start, I don't promote and I don't condone violence. However, I do agree with the concept of revenge only in situations where it is warranted. Now, I would also like to state that the writing in this book is, I don't think I've ever read a book that has made me want to close my eyes, like when you're watching a horror movie and you don't want to see certain things because it's but this book literally, there are times where I got scared and I was like, oh my god, this is crazy. And I really appreciated that from Clay Kane. If you are looking for a horror novel to read, definitely a must. I know that it is historically rich. However, you will definitely enjoy the book. It's descriptive. I think that you're going to love the characters and love the relationships formed in this book. And yeah, I loved how he was able to depict LGBTQIA plus love, plus also the traditional heterogeneous love, and I really appreciate that he was able to do that. This book is amazing. It's definitely a play on good and evil, and yeah, and in terms of the description, the descriptive language, this book is written perfectly. I definitely want a part 2 of this book. Are we gonna get it? I don't know. But you know what though? If anything, I think that they should put this book in a movie. If they put this book in a movie, I'm telling you, I would go watch it. I'm gonna speak for myself. I will go watch it. But who would be a great director for this movie? Maybe the director of Sinners. I think he'd be a great one for this movie. I think Quentin Tarantino would be a great person for this movie. A great director for this movie. Yeah, this book needs to be made into a film, and not a low budget film. Let's respect the art and the work. I would say that this is definitely a high budget film, and whoever decides to produce this, I'll be the first one in theaters to watch it, because this book right here is so good. I loved it. And what's his name? Clay Kane did an amazing job writing it. Yeah, how long did it take me to read this book? I would say it took me 2 days. 2 days to read this book. That's how good it was. Mind you, I can go an entire day without reading, but Yeah, I can go an entire day with reading, but yeah, it depends on the book. But this book right here took me 2 days to read. It was really good. Um, and I loved the book. The book was really good. And I don't really have anything else more to say, honestly. Mind you, there are different stories in here. Like, it's not focused on, like, let's just say, like, three characters throughout the entire novel. Like, they do break up the book into several different stories, which I also appreciate too. But you will realize that each story in the book are like all connected to each other. So that's also pretty cool as well. Um, and yeah, I would definitely say that this book, I don't know if it's a bestseller. Let's see. I would say so. This book is a bestseller. Burn Down Master's House. If it's not, then I'm really surprised. So it has a 4.7 out of 5 on Amazon, okay? And it has a 4.4 on Goodreads. Yeah. I would definitely say that this book was really good. Really, really, really good. But to each their own. Some people are not like horror novel enthusiasts. I'm not either, but in terms of this book, I was willing to open my genre palette to a horror novel, and I would say that I was very happy that I made the decision to purchase a copy of this book, and now I'm doing a review, and I'm gladly doing a review because this book was amazing. So anyways, this book is heavily centered on the theme of revenge. That theme may be triggering for some people, and if it is, I totally understand. I would not recommend reading it. If you are not the type of person to like want to read like gruesome killings, I also wouldn't recommend this book either. But for those that can and are willing to read about, read a horror movie and to read graphic details about someone's murder, definitely recommend this book. And yes, the book is inspired by true events, so I'm not sure if the level of the violence depicted in this book is what actually took place in real life. However, it is inspired by true events, so that's something interesting to know as well. And yeah, definitely this book, honestly, if I can choose a book and I know I say this with every book, I say that every book is great, and I probably said that, yeah, I say that every book is great, but honestly, this book is definitely my favorite book of the year. And I've read a lot of great books this year, and I say this with a very, but I would say Clay Kane's Burn Down Master's House would forever be one of my favorite novels, like, ever, of all time, if it was up to me. And yeah, great book. Loved the book. It was awesome. And I really, really recommend that you read it. It's a very easy read, so you'll definitely get through the book. You'll get through the book. Like, it's not a difficult read. And overall, love the book. Love this author. I really hope for a part 2. If we don't get a part 2, I hope for a high budget movie. If we do get a high budget movie, I'm even happier. This book was amazing, and I really feel like other people would love this book too. So yeah, love the book. Awesome. I really hope to meet Clay Kane in real life and tell him how much I loved this book, because this book was boom. Boom, 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 boom. Like, so good. So yeah. Now, you may not agree with my stance earlier. And that's okay. And if you do believe that the slaves were justified in their decision to avenge their masters, Let me know in the comments. Now, if you don't believe that their decision to avenge their masters is justified, also let me know in the comments. Let's discuss. And as always, I love you guys so much, and thank you so much for listening and watching today's episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next episode. Bye!